So, what is, your name, age, year, and most importantly for the video, like how do you identify?
Um, my name is Shadani Juarez. I'm a sophomore here at the University of Redlands. I identify as a queer Chicana.
All right, my name's Kareem Gora. I'm 29 years old. My job is County Riverside Communication Specialist, and I also serve on the Fontana Planning Commission. And culturally, I identify as Latino.
Okay, so my name is Janet Losada. I am 20 years old, and I attend the University of Redlands as a third-year Johnson student. And how do I identify culturally? I identify as a Chicana, but leaning more towards Mexican than American.
How did you learn history in school, and was Latino or Chicano history taught a part of that?
So I went to a very white school. So the classes that I was taking, regardless of their level, AP US history, were definitely based in white history. And even when it came time to talk about issues that related to Mexican people in the United States, or even had to do with Mexico itself, the Mexican-American War, a lot of the conversation was still around the United States and less around like what was going on in terms of like the political atmosphere in Mexico, or even like the cultural one, how people were assimilating in the United States and such. And so my history was very limited.
Well, it was basically by the books. It wasn't really inclusive of the diversity or the lack of diversity in our neighborhood. It was a lot about colonization, and even in the subject of world politics, it wasn't really world politics in itself, but it was really about the domination about the white man. To complement that like side of the story or to know about the other side, I would ask my dad. For example, like the Mexico-American War, I'd ask my dad, Dad, is this true that it was a peaceful war in the sense that we gave the land because of something? He's like, no, mija, like actually we got betrayed by one of our generals because he was convinced money-wise that it was a better idea to give money. So for me, history, I was taught in two ways. One, through my dad, which is like my Mexican side, and then through school, which was the American side. So I was always in between. I didn't know what side to take. I didn't know what side was more valid. But at the time, sometimes I felt it was more valid learning the textbook than what my dad was, because he doesn't have proof of that.
How do you think that people treated you in your neighborhood versus in your schooling, in all the different schooling that you've been through?
My childhood was like brimming with color. When I came here, I came to Monterey, but which is like a historically very white neighborhood, but I spent my time in Seaside, California, and that is full of Chicanos, full of black people, and full of East Asians. So everywhere you looked, you saw someone of color. I think there was one white kid in my middle school, so it was completely different.
Yeah, so living in a community such as Fontana, which is very diverse, which wasn't historically diverse,
Right.
but due to the affordable housing and the placement of our community, we had an influx. Right now we're at an 87% Hispanic population in our school system. When I was home, when I was here in Fontana, I didn't see the color lines. It wasn't until I went to Irvine that I started hearing about racial things ongoing at campus, in which the university has developed a program to promote diversity and find ways to promote it throughout the campus on an ongoing basis. So the program was called Intercultural Scholars, and it was a scholarship program, so only selected candidates were a part of it, and we're organizing to promote diversity on campus and actually project this image to the community, so to say. And it also helps with them, receiving more federal dollars and receiving more students of color. So it was there that I identified myself as a Latino and as kind of as an anomaly in that area, because there wasn't many that looked like me or had my similar experiences.
But I think I was tokenized in a lot of ways, not just by my peers, but also by the administration. a lot of the times I would help with admissions event because I was one of the only girls of color, and it was me and then my half black friend up there talking about how great our school was. So that was consistent throughout my years there.
Being in those two very different environments, how do you feel that people treated you or looked at you?
They weren't mean. I just think they didn't know exactly what they were saying. But I would get weird comments like, your hair is so thick, it kind of feels like a horse's. And I'm like, a lot of comments like that. But I think I was raised in color. Like, I was raised with people who were different from me, but not that different. And then going to a school with like a mainly white atmosphere, what I was being told and what I was myself saying at times reflected where I was going to school.
So what are some ways that you think that media kind of plays into a role of portraying Latinos?
I think there's two sides to that. Sometimes they portray us as rowdy kids. Like, apparently all Latinos are gang members. You know what I mean? So I'm very confused by that. So in that sense, we're portrayed as rowdy, very untraditional kids, which we are, but at the same time, we're very traditional in other sense. So I'm kind of, that's one side, right? And then the other side, there's this TV channel called Fusion TV by Jorge Ramos. And in that side, I think he's trying to create this space for us and where we mediate that being contemporary and being traditional. So in that way, I feel like the Latinos are being more accepted in that channel, and where the other channels are, broadcast channels are kind of really hitting us in the, you know, trying to tell us like, why aren't you like our homeland people? You know what I mean? And I totally understand that, but we live in two spaces at the same time, and you can't override another one, you know?
Well, I mean, as a child, like growing up, all you saw was the novelas, you saw the magazines, and you saw the movies where Latinos weren't leading parts and weren't, you know, the top, you know, and even in hip-hop culture, which is pretty predominant, you know, in my generation, you know, we were kind of a small section of that movement, even though we kind of had a similar story, you know, a similar struggle with our brothers and sisters that are African American, but it doesn't portray us as mostly positive. Most of the time, we're either the loud Latina, or they're your maid, or they're objectified if they're a woman. You know, I don't know. I don't think it's an accurate portrayal of our culture. It's kind of, you know, too materialized. I think it focuses too much on the wrong things, but that's entertainment as a whole.
I mean, my dad's a big fan of the show Breaking Bad, and I tried to watch a couple of episodes of him, but I don't think I could really get into it because a lot of the times that Latino or Chicano characters are portrayed, they're portrayed as drug dealers, and there's that stigma, and you can see that stigma in what people are saying today around like the political race, what Trump is calling Mexican people drug dealers and rapists. A lot of the times it's really dehumanizing. Even in other shows like Bates Motel, like a lot of popular media that my friends were watching depicted people who looked like me as someone who wasn't really trustworthy, who was kind of in it for themselves. So I think that maybe not directly, but subtly affected the way that people treated me.
What do you think are the biggest issues or struggles in the Chicano culture today? And then what do you want to see in the future?
I think a lot of it is unity, man.
Even within the Chicano community, there's a big exclusivity to it, and a big discourse of like, what does it mean to be Chicano? For example, you're Chicano if you have a Latino last name, if you're Garcia, if you're Lozada, you know, if you have a Lopez. But then, okay, that's one. And then sometimes if you know the Spanish language, si hablas español. But what if you don't? But you still identify as Chicano, no? Because of the movements of my skin color, right? I'm morena, you know? Or some Chicanos are even morenos. Like, I think in that sense we should relate Chicano to mestizaje, which is like a combination of many, and it's just, we're not one thing. We've never been one thing. So in that way, I think the Chicano community needs to be more inclusive in that sense.
We have the economic power, but we're just not harnessing it. A part of that is because we don't have a strong enough chamber, and that's basically a chamber of commerce that outreaches to the businesses. And even if it's not that chamber, it's creating their own chamber that has that unity. That's one of the issues. The second one is disenfranchised. They just don't vote. I mean, we should be as vocal and as engaged as possible. But California, being majority Latino, and then you have people saying that, you know, we're rapists, we're this and that, and trying to build a wall to keep us out. And, you know, that creates a negative portrayal of who we are, because that doesn't define us. I would say number 3 is a lack of engagement in the education sector. I mean, traditionally and culturally, Latino parents hold a sense of trust with administrators and with your teachers, and so they're not as actively engaged. And I don't really blame it on the mom so much. I blame more on the fathers. The machismo, you know, they're so busy working that they're unfamiliar. You know, they're not able to speak to the education that children are receiving, and it's not empowering our kids. The percentages are very low on Latinos that hold master's degrees and doctorate degrees, and we need to change that. We need to change how many Latino business owners we have.
And then the second comment is, I'm very interested in how we're fighting for movements that are non-traditional to our raíz. So like third wave feminist movements. I'm very interested in that, and how, as Chicanas, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to enforce this new way of thinking of the female body in our tradition? How is that being accepted by our tradition, by our traditional background? I don't know, I'm very interested in that. Like, what's the discourse? How do our parents feel about us bringing that discourse into our communities, you know? In a way, are we colonizing our own people through bringing those discourses? But yeah, I don't know. It's complicated to be a Chicana. Yeah, it's complicated.